listeners and viewers. Welcome to Kaduna State Ministry of Education Radio and TV e-learning program designed for our SS3 and other students staying at home due to the coronavirus pandemic. The present administration, under the able leadership of His Excellency, Malam Nasir Ahmed El-Rufai, is positioned, as always, to ensure that under his leadership, our students are not left behind in all areas of human endeavors, especially education. Kaduna State is the center of learning. Therefore, we want to ensure that our students excel in their forthcoming examinations and beyond. Students and other learners at home are given this opportunity in order to continue learning, as education is a continuous process. Different subjects will be taught in this program to assist students to perform excellently in the forthcoming Senior School Certificate examination being conducted by NECO and WAEC as soon as schools reopen. Teachers making presentations will always provide their names and phone numbers during each presentation, and they can be contacted for questions, further explanations, and/or clarifications. The following numbers and contacts can also be reached for expression of any concern or observation: 090-865-00545 or 080-383-62072. Our website is www.education.kdsg.gov.ng. Our email education@kdsg.gov.ng or education.kdsg@gmail.com. Our YouTube channel, Ministry of Education, Kaduna State. Our Twitter handle @Kaduna_MOE. Or our Facebook page, Ministry of Education, Kaduna State. Stay safe, stay at home, and learn well. Thank you, happy listening, and happy viewing.
Good day, students. You are welcome to another segment of the e-learning. My name is Mariam Ahmed Gidado, your biology teacher. For today, we are going to look at fertilization and zygote development in flowering plants. My students, if you can recall, in our previous lessons, we looked at sexual reproduction in flowering plant, where we explained or where we discussed the parts of the flower. We have seen the male part of the flower, and we've also seen the female part of the flower. We also discussed pollination. That is the transfer of pollen grains from the male part of the flower to the stigma, which is the female part of the flower. We have seen the types of pollination and also the agent of pollination. So after pollination, what happens in the process of reproduction in flowering plants? When pollination takes place, that is not the end of the reproduction. There are other things that follow in order to achieve sexual reproduction. So the next process after pollination is fertilization. Pollination is the first step in the process of sexual reproduction in flowering plants. I will take it again. Pollination is the first step. That is, the pollen grains have to be transferred from the anther of the flower to the stigma, because we know the plants are not animals, so they do not move from one place to another. So if we want these gametes from the male to go to the female, they have to be transferred by some agents, and that is the process of the pollination. So now, when pollination is achieved, what happens next? The next process after pollination is fertilization, and that is what we are going to see in this topic. What happened to the flower during fertilization? But before we go into the topic of fertilization, I want us to look at structure of the pollen grain. That is the pollen grain that is being transferred from the anther to the stigma. How does it look like? The ovule that is supposed to fuse with the pollen grains, how does it look like? So let us look at the structure first, then we go and discuss fertilization. Okay, an ovule composed of 3 main parts. The ovule has a spherical structure or a round structure that looks like a ball. That is the pollen grain, sorry, and that is the male part of the that is the structure that is containing the male gamete, the pollen grain. It has an outer covering, or it has 2 walls covering it. The outer wall that is covering the pollen is known as the exine. I will repeat, the outer wall that is covering the pollen grain is known as the exine, that is the outer membrane. Apart from the outer membrane, there is another membrane inside, which is the intine wall. So the exine is the outer covering and the intine is the inner covering, that it has 2 walls. Then the inside of the pollen grain is known as the cytoplasm. Then right inside the cytoplasm, you have a centrally placed nucleus. So having seen the structure of the pollen, but remember, when a pollen grain is being deposited on the stigma, it starts to germinate. So how does the germination take place? Immediately a pollen grain is deposited on the stigma. The surface of the stigma contains a fluid that is sweet. That fluid makes the pollen grain to start to germinate. And how does the germination take place? It is the outer covering of the pollen that will open, or it will burst, to release an outgrowth that will grow along the side of the pollen. And that long tube that grows out is known as a pollen tube. The function of that tube is to be able to reach the ovule. Remember, the stigma is on top, then followed by the long style. Then inside, there is an ovary. Inside the ovary, that is where you have the ovule. So pollen grain being on top of the stigma cannot reach the ovule itself until it follows a particular path. So that particular passage through which the nucleus of the pollen grain will pass to go and meet the ovule is the tube. That is the germinating tube, the pollen tube. So the function of the pollen tube is to make the male gamete to go and reach, gamete to go and reach the ovule. So now let's look at the structure of an ovule. A mature ovule has the following parts. First part is known as the hilum, which is the point of attachment of the ovule to the placenta. The hilum is the point through which the ovule attaches itself to the placenta in the ovary. After the hilum, there is another part known as the integument. These integuments are 2 coverings that are 2 walls or 2 membranes that are covering the ovule. The outer integument and the inner integument. Just like in the pollen grain, we have the exine and the intine. Also, the ovule has 2 walls, the inner wall and the outer wall. So those are the integuments. Then we have another structure known as the embryo sac. The embryo sac is the particular structure that is housing the female sex cell or the female gamete. And that is the tissue that produces the female gamete. Then we have another structure known as the nucellus. The nucellus is a tissue enclosed by the integument. It is nutritive in function. That is after the 2 integument, the inner one and the outer one, there is another tissue that is called the nucellus. It is nutritive in nature. That is, it provides food to the embryo. Then another structure is the macrophyle, which is the opening into the ovule left by the integument. The two integument, that is the inner one and the outer one, they are not completely closed. The inner one left a hole or a passage. So that particular passage is what we call the microfile. And the function of this passage is when the pollen tube comes into the ovary, it is through the microfile that it enters into the ovary to release the male gamete. So a microfile is an opening through which the male gamete will be released. So having looked at the structure of the ovule and now, or the structure of the pollen grain and the structure of the ovule. So now let's look at the process of fertilization. What happened at fertilization? As I said, the pollen grain, the pollination places the pollen grain on the stigma. But as I said, the pollen grain doesn't have leg to move. So it produces an outgrowth, which is known as the pollen tube. It is the pollen tube now that will grow down to go and meet the ovary. When it goes into the ovary, it enters the ovary through the microfile. That is the opening which I said, that is where the pollen tube will enter. So having entered the microfile, it will now release the nucleus. There are two nucleus, the tube nucleus and the generative nucleus. The tube nucleus helps in the production of the pollen tube, but the generative nucleus contains the male gamete. So the male gamete, the outer coat of the pollen grain, the exon splits and the pollen tube grows out and down inside the cell. It grows into the ovule through the microfile and the end of the pollen tube bursts. That is when the pollen tube reaches the ovary and it reaches the microfile, the particular opening, then it bursts. That it opens so that the male gamete will be released into the ovary to go and meet the female gamete. Having looked at the process of this fertilization, so the two male nucleus are released. As I said, the tube nucleus is for development of the tube, while the other nucleus is fertilization. So inside the two male nucleus are released inside the embryo sac. One male nucleus fuses with the ovule to form the zygote. So generative nucleus of the pollen grain now fuse with the ovule to form a structure known as the zygote. That is the first fertilization. I will take it again. The male nucleus will be released to meet the ovule. And when the ovule meets with the male nucleus, which has the process is known as fertilization, and the structure that is formed is called the zygote. And this is the first fertilization. The second male nucleus fuses with the secondary nucleus to form a triploid cell that produces the endosperm. As I said, there are two nucleus. The first one meets the female gamete to form the zygote. The second one now meets the secondary nucleus to form a structure known as the endosperm. The endosperm also is nutritive in nature. It covers the embryo and it supplies the embryo with nutrients. This is referred to as second fertilization. Fusion of male gamete and ovule is first fertilization. Fusion of the second male gamete with the secondary nucleus is known as second fertilization. So meaning flowering plants have double fertilization. So usually one pollen grain reaches the ovule to fertilize an ovule. But in some cases, many pollen grains are being deposited on the stigma. That is a situation whereby the ovary has many ovules. Let me give you an example with mango and orange. If you look at mango fruit, after eating the mango, you have one seed inside. So meaning it is one pollen tube that will fertilize that female gamete to form one seed. But if you look at orange, it has many seeds. So meaning in the embryo, in the ovary, there are many ovules. If there are many ovules, one male gamete will not fertilize all of them. So many pollen grains will be deposited on top of the stigma, and all of them will produce the pollen tube so that they can find their way into the ovary to fertilize other seeds. That is why in orange we have many seeds, not one seed. So one male gamete is not enough to fertilize all the seeds, but many pollen grains will be deposited. That is a situation where the plant has many seeds. So having seen how zygote is formed, fusion of male and female gamete of the flower, it forms a structure which we call zygote. So now what happens to the zygote? The zygote divides by mitosis to form many cells which differentiate and become organized into an embryo. I will take it again. Zygote that is formed as a result of the fusion of the male gamete and the female gamete, the zygote divides by cell division, by mitosis. Remember, we have two types of cell division, the meiosis and the mitosis. So zygote divide by mitosis to become an embryo, but it is not only the division. When it divides, the cells specialize and differentiate. So that division and the specialization and the differentiation turns the zygote to become an embryo. So the embryo is made out of the following parts. The embryo has a plumule. That plumule of an embryo is that part of the embryo that if you plant a seed, that will grow up, push the soil, come out of the soil to form the main body of the plant up. So that structure of the embryo is what is called the plumule. So it is also known as the embryonic shoots. Apart from the plumule, we have another structure known as the radicle or embryonic roots. My students, remember in plants, we have the upper part of the plant that will grow up to form the branches, leaves, flowers, and the rest. We have another structure that will go into the soil to form the roots. So this radicle is the one that will grow into the soil to form the root part of the plant. Then we have another structure which is known as the cotyledon. So the cotyledon in some seeds or in some embryo is one, but in some embryo is two. There are two. The cotyledons are two. So it depends on the type of seed. Then we have, sometimes we have an endosperm, meaning not all the embryos have endosperm. Some have the endosperm, some do not have the endosperm. I will still take it again. An embryo has four parts. The plumule, which grows to become the shoot system. The radicle, which grows down inside the soil to form the root system. Then we have the cotyledons, which grows to form the seed leaves when the seeds start to germinate. And I said in some seed it is one, in some seed there are two. And sometimes an endosperm, though not all the seeds have. Some seeds have endosperm, some do not have the endosperm. So that is the development of the embryo. The embryo continues to develop. The nucellus disintegrates. The endosperm may be used up by the embryo or it may persist. That is the endosperm, which is part of the embryo. In some embryo, it is used up. In some embryo, it persists. The ovule now develops into a seed. That is from zygote to embryo, from embryo to seed. Zygote divides, differentiates to form the embryo. The embryo develops now to form a seed. Its inner and outer integument develop into the inner and outer seed coat respectively. Remember we said an ovule has two integuments, the outer one and the inner one. The inner and the outer integument become the seed coat respectively. The ovary undergoes changes after fertilization and becomes the fruit, while the ovary walls develop into the fruit wall. What we are saying here is after zygote divides, it develops the embryo. After the embryo develops, it forms the seeds. So when seed is being formed, what happened to the other part of the flower? Remember, the ovary is there, which is housing the ovule. It is now the ovule that has become the seed. So the ovary now becomes the part of the fruit, while the ovary wall becomes the fruit wall. The sepals, the petals, the style, and the stigma die out or they wither off. What we are saying, remember in the flower, apart from the male and the female, we have other floral part, the calyx and the corolla. So after fertilization, formation of seeds, formation of fruit, what happened to them? Some of them, they are being formed to form the fruit. Some of them die off, though some of them persist. Just like in guava, all of you know a guava fruit. So if you look at the guava fruit, apart from the stick which you use in maybe plugging of the guava, there is another structure on top that is blackish that you remove it before eating. That is the remain of the sepal that has dried up, even though you don't eat it, but that shows that there was a sepal there before the development of the fruit. So meaning some part will die off, some part will follow the seed to form the fruit part of the, and then style again. Style may remain in some plants like Pride of Barbados. Style, that is the female part. So in Pride of Barbados, the style also remain. If you look at the fruit of Pride of Barbados, flamboyant, the style attaches itself to the fruit. So having looked at that, let us look at the structure of the seed. We have seen that zygote develops to embryo, embryo develops to a seed. So what is a seed? A seed is defined as the ripened, fertilized, and developed ovule. It is a reproductive structure which disperses and survives for some time. A typical seed consists of the following parts. Seed coat. Seed coat is the outer covering. My student, let me give you an example of beans. If you want to wash beans, I think you soak it in water. It swells up. Then after swelling up, when you crush it, there is a bark that comes out. So that shows the seed coat. It's just like a cloth that is worn on the seed, which you remove when you are going to wash the seed. That is an example of a seed coat, what that is covering the seed. Then it has the helium, point of attachment of the ovule to the placenta. The point at which it attaches itself to the ovary, that is what we call the helium. We have the micropyle. We said micropyle is an opening through which the pollen tube grows. But in a seed, the micropyle will serve as a space that allows air and water to go into the seed. Because when the seed is going to be germinating, it needs air, it needs water. So it is through the micropyle that the seed receives air and water. Then we have the embryo. Let me give you an example. I want you to differentiate between embryo and seed. A mango seed, you have the hard part when you have finished eating the mango. So that hard part is the seed. But when you break it, try to break the hard part of the mango, there is something inside again. That is the embryo. And that is why we say the embryo has the plumule, the radicle, and the cotyledon. If you want to plant the mango, immediately after eating, you just go and start planting it. No, you have to open, or when you plant it, it opens to release the embryo. So it is the embryo, the plumule will now grow to form the mango plant, the radicle will now go inside to form the fruit. The cotyledon will now give you the flower, the seed leaf. My student, let's quickly look at types of seed. We have two types of seed. Remember we said an embryo has plumule, the radicle, and the cotyledon. So that cotyledon is the seed leaf that will come out immediately the seed is germinating. Look at beans. Those of you that go to the farm, when you plant beans, When it is coming out, how does it come out? It comes out, pushes out the soil and leave you with two leaves, sorry. So those two leaves gives the dicot seed. It has two leaves, dicot seed. But look at maize. If you plant a maize, when the maize starts to germinate, it pushes the soil, it comes one like this with one seed leaf, meaning monocot. So monocot means one, dicot means two. So monocot seed, which is the seed that has only one leaf or one cotyledon. For example, we have rice, maize, wheat. Try to plant maize, rice, wheat, then you will see what a monocot is. Then try to plant a beans. When it comes out, the two seed leaves shows that the beans is a dicot seed. An example, we have the beans, the mango, and the neem. If you plant mango, immediately it starts germinating, you see two leaves coming out, meaning the mango seed is a dicotyledonous seed. That brings to the end of this topic. But next one we meet, we continue from where we stop. But before I go, my students, I have an assignment for you to do at home before we meet in the next lesson. Assignment number 1A is, with the aid of a well-labeled diagram, describe the structure of a mature ovule. Please, I said well-labeled diagram, draw and label. B part, explain the process of fertilization in flowering plants. 2, outline any 4 changes which take place in any named flower from the time of pollination to the time of formation of fruits. I will take it again, my student. Assignment number 1A is, with the aid of a well-labeled diagram, describe the structure of a mature ovule. B part, explain the process of fertilization and in flowering plants. Number 2, outline any 4 changes which take place in any named flower from the time of pollination to the formation of fruits. Before I go, my student, I have references for you. There are 2 books which I usually consult to form your lessons. So if you have any difficulty, you can consult these books. We have Essentials of Biology for Senior Secondary School by Michael. And we have another book, Modern Biology for Senior Secondary School by Sarojini et al. So if you have any problem, you can consult these books, but still, you can also consult me through my number. I'm waiting for your observations, your comments, your questions through this number, 070-3158-6058. I will repeat my number again, 070-3158-6058. So waiting for your comments and observation. I remain Mariam Ahmed Gidado, your biology teacher. Coronavirus is real. Stay safe, stay at home, wash your hands, use your face mask always, and stay out of trouble, my student. Till we meet again.